This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and this is a special deep dive into the famous Power Team USA that featured Sting and Lex Luger, the two other guys, as well as all the other guys that Rick is going to talk about. I don't remember their names. Steve Desalvo was one of them. But today, as a guest host, we have John Paz, who is the host of the two-man power trip of wrestling, Tom Pritchard's podcast, Kevin Sullivan's Taskmaster Talks podcast, and a lot more, including Rick Bassman's podcast. But we'll let John, the podcaster extraordinaire, who just did an interview with Arn Anderson, by the way, which is going to appear on this channel in the coming days. We'll let John Paz introduce the man today. So here you go, John. Take it over.
Yes, the man, actually, not Luger, but the Ultimate Warrior. The man who found the Ultimate Warrior. The man that found Sting. The man that found John Cena. The leader of Power Team USA. The CEO, the boss, Rick Bassman. Rick, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you? John, can I start by introducing the newest member of our happy little family here on Maui?
Yes, who is this guy?
This is the newest addition to our family here. Say hi, buddy. And he came to us just 3 days ago, and he is the sweetest little pit bull of all time. And we don't have a name for him yet, so we might need some help from the listeners to come up with a name. Anyway, glad to introduce the new little dude here.
Call him the Jim Cornette killer. You can sick him on that fat piece of crap.
Hannibal, you're going to make John Paz cry, because there's some kind of love story going on there that we just haven't even begun to pull back the layers on yet. So I think we need to let that one go for the day.
He is a close personal friend. That's all I can say. He's a great guy.
Fair enough. I've got to say,
not a minority.
It almost makes me want to have an open mind about Jim Cornette, because John Paz, who I know to be a genuine, good quality human being, can call Jim Cornette a close personal friend. Then maybe there is something to, as you so eloquently said, this fat piece of shit after all.
Yeah, I highly doubt it. The only good thing about Jim Cornette is he's a good bullshitter and con artist and self-promoter. But this is not about him. This is about Power Team USA. Cornette never trained anyone that became stars the level of the Ultimate Warrior and Sting. So we'll let John get it going, how it all started, because this was actually your first foray into professional wrestling, I believe.
Yeah, Rick, that's one thing I want to know. Like, how did you kind of get into the business? I mean, you're going to create this huge thing, Power Team USA. You're going to get these guys that are just like molds of clay, almost just these green, huge, gigantic guys. But how do you start into pro wrestling?
Well, I did, as Hannibal said, that was my first foray into pro wrestling. And it was a very, very, if I say so myself, a very misinformed one. What I like to say now, misinformed on my part. So when I talk about Power Team now, I talk about it as a really stupid experiment. And again, stupid on my part. I didn't know what I was doing, John, when I got into this. But let me explain what I mean, and you'll see why I'm saying this. So I grew up a huge wrestling fan in the early 70s. Actually, yeah, mid 70s when I really started to get into it. I was a big fan of the magazines. I know those Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler, Inside Wrestling, even some of the other non-actor mags. I used to get everything, man. This is when you could go to newsstands and actually buy magazines at newsstands. I'm sure most of the young listeners out there have no idea what we're talking about. But this dog, by the way, is like my new appendage. This dog will not leave me alone, which is awesome.
You already had Saber and Gunner as name suggestions, by the way.
Yeah, keep them coming, you guys, please. I'm gonna find something that good. Sorry?
What about Piper after Roddy Piper?
That's, I've thought about Roddy, but I didn't think about Piper. That's okay. That's worth, yeah. I mean, I don't know that I'll name him from a wrestling influence or not, but if I did, it probably would be that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks, John. So anyway, I grew up a big fan, bought all the magazines. That's when we had territories. So our territory was LaBelle in California. So every Saturday, KCOP, Channel 13, with Dick Lane was the announcer. I remember the referees' names. I remember the phone number you would call to get your tickets, if you can believe that, for wrestling back then. And my dad would take us to the Olympic Auditorium every January for the 22-man battle royal. And that's something we laughed about in UPW many years later, because I used to just torture my poor guys with battle royals, because I grew up such a mark of the 22-man battle royal that UPW would run those things all the time. But in any case, I also grew up a fan of comic books. I was a DC guy, not a Marvel guy, but that's really not important. And when I started in, I got into the entertainment business, promoting concerts, the whole story. I was still a fan of wrestling when I started watching again at the advent of the Hulk Hogan era. What I remember, John, it struck me watching when Hogan was on top and Wyndham and Rotundo were on top as a tag team, the American Express. Duggan was coming on strong then with the American Flag. Dusty Rhodes was over on the other side, the American Dream. And here's what I remember thinking about. And this is it's going to sound like, I want to stop real second for Dennis McNown, whose dog just passed away. Brother, no, I'm not naming the dog Hellwig, not for all the money in the world. But for Dennis, yeah, man, my heart goes out to you. It's fucking brutal when your dog passes. Their family. I just, my best, my condolences. And I know it's hard to believe, and I don't mean this in a flippant way, but it does get better over time for sure. All right. So I know it's a long story. Let me get to Power Team. I grew up watching. I was a big fan of comic books. Start watching in the 80s. I loved all the big guys because to me, John, that's what pro wrestlers were. They were comic book characters come to life. That's why, I was always known as the big guy Mark, because I thought that's what a pro wrestler should be. They should look like the freaking warlord. Yes, I am a fan of the Green Lantern. Absolutely, Alan. Absolutely. Green Lantern. If you're going to be a wrestler, you should look like the Green Lantern, but as a pro wrestler. So, John, now I'm watching in the 80s, and here's what struck me. And this sounds really blasphemous to say now, and it sounds disrespectful, what I'm about to say, and it's not intended that way. I was looking at Dusty Rhodes, who's amazing, but I didn't recognize it then. Hulk Hogan, one of the greatest of all time. I didn't recognize it then. I'm looking at Wyndham, Rotundo, Duggan, Rhodes, Hogan. I'm like, these are the all-American heroes? Because you remember mid-'80s, it was all about America versus the world, right? So these are the guys the promoters have selected to represent the American ideal. And to me, a fan of Captain America in the comic books, these guys just weren't what the all-American heroes in pro wrestling should have been. Some of them weren't very good looking. They didn't have good physiques. They couldn't articulate very well in interviews. I'm like, you got to take 4 Captain Americas, get them from different multi-ethnic backgrounds with great faces, great bodies, really intelligent, put them in red, white, and blue, and push them into pro wrestling as the ultimate all-American comic book heroes come to life. That thought struck me one day. I'll never forget. I was in bed with some random chick. This is during the sex, drugs, and rock and roll days in Santa Barbara, making her watch wrestling in the morning. This girl's like, why are we watching pro wrestling? I said, because I like it. So I was nicer than that, but just making the story. And that thought about the all-American heroes came to me. I'm like, and when I think of things, I just usually go do them. So I wanted to find 4 guys who looked like my idea of pro wrestling superstars from different ethnicities, put them together, dress them in red, white, and blue, and push them to the top of the business. That was where the Team America or Power Team USA concept came from. It was just born from that thought. And, as you know, I set out and I did it. But the reason I mentioned a few minutes ago, the entire concept was just ill-conceived is, I wasn't even green. I didn't know anything about pro wrestling other than being a fan. I had no clue, John, that you couldn't take 4 brand new guys who had never set foot in a ring before as a 4-man unit that you couldn't put them all in and push them to the top. I didn't even know the word push. I didn't know what anything meant back in those days. So it was ill-fated right from the beginning because no promoter was going to take 4 brand new guys and make them stars. It's just not how the business worked back then. So there's a lot of detail to it. I can tell you about it if you want to know. I can answer questions. But over the next few months, I sunk a ton of my money and one other guy's money who was an investor into creating Power Team USA.
So where do you find Sting and Jim Hellwig, obviously the Warrior, Garland Donahue, Mark Miller? Where do you Ed Brock? Where do you find these guys?
Well, my brother and I, as part of our little mini rock and roll empire in Santa Barbara and Ventura and San Luis Obispo counties, we had a security guard company that provided security for concerts and nightclubs and all that. And when I first had the idea, I'm like, okay, I'm going to answer your question, but to back up, I'm like, what ethnicities would Team America be comprised of? And these days, we probably say, well, Caucasian, Black, Latino, and Asian American. I think that's probably would be the first four we'd gravitate toward if there were going to be 4. Back then, my thoughts were Caucasian, Black, Italian American, and American Indian. Only reason being, this is going to sound like a really ridiculous thing to say. In 1985, the Latinos and the Asian Americans just weren't that big. You wouldn't have found a guy the size that I had in mind back at that point in time. So in thinking of the 4 ethnicities I was after, I immediately thought, whoa, Mark Miller from our security guard company, who was a very close friend of mine, fits the Italian American. And Garland Donahue fits the Black guy. So I just looked in my own backyard. I approached them. They're like, hey, we love wrestling. That sounds great. Why not? I then started searching around. Mark told me about a friend of his named Ed Brock. Now, in my book, I talk about the 5 that got away. These are the guys that, in my opinion, Evan Marriott, Joe Millionaire is another. Guys, in my opinion, had they stuck with it, would have been major freaking stars. Michael Hearn is another as well. Ed Brock could have been one of the biggest stars in the history of pro wrestling. He was 6'5", which back in those days was very tall. He was 290 pounds, jacked to the gills. The guy was like a better looking version of Johnny Depp on a 6'5", 280 pound body with long black hair. And he was real legit Native American. So I cast, for lack of a better word, cast Ed Brock as my American Indian, and then found a DHL driver by the name of Jerry Botbael, great looking, 6'6", 295 pound, blonde haired, blue eyed, all American boy. Cast Jerry as my Caucasian and put money together, rented a place, built a ring, hired a trainer, started training them. Very quickly, Jerry and Ed became problems for different reasons. So we got rid of them. Now back down to 2, the Italian American and the Black guy. I needed 2 replacements. I became friends with Pete Grimkowski and Ed Connors. They were the founders and owners of Gold's Gym Worldwide. They were keeping up on what I was doing. They thought it was a great idea. They're like, man, you get this thing to take off. Gold's Gym will be involved in a major way. I'm like, great. They actually threw some money in as preliminary sponsors. And not Pete, but Ed Connors said to me, I know a guy you might be interested in for your Indian. He's on the other side of the U.S. He's in Florida. He's about to start practicing as a chiropractor, but he hasn't started yet. Let me send you a picture. No email back then. So he emails me, or not email, he mails me an 8x10, and it's a photo of Jim Hellwig. And I'm looking at this photo going, wow, how tall is this guy? 6'5" with this physique? That was unheard of back then. He goes, I'll set up a phone call. Puts me on the phone with him. This guy from call number 1 was truly 30 some years later, one of the most articulate and intelligent guys I ever met in this business. And we hit it off on the phone. We had a couple of great conversations. I'm like, dude, come on out. So next thing you know, Jim Hellwig is on a plane. In the meantime, we're still short our blonde-haired, blue-eyed, all-American boy. Now, the place we had rented to train Power Team USA was at a racquetball center in the San Fernando Valley. It's a little area called Northridge, back where there used to be pro wrestling at Devonshire Downs with the John Tolis and Freddie Blassie and Superstar Graham days. So in any case, there was a guy working as the day shift manager there, probably $5 an hour back in those days. I'm like, this guy's got a really good look. And he's a really nice guy. You could tell he's intelligent. So I give him a whole concept. I go, what do you think? He goes, oh, no, man, I have pro wrestling. I have no interest in that. I'm getting married. I've got my career path. I mean, this guy had his life planned. And I worked on this guy and worked on him for weeks and a couple of months. He finally said, okay, I'll give it a try. And that was Steve Borden, who became Sting. So he just happened to be working at the place we had rented to train. And then Warrior came from the owner of Gold's Gym.
Tennessee Tim said any heat with the original Power Team, those guys that left, I guess.
Oh, man, those guys, especially the leader, Darren McBee, can just go fuck off. No, man, seriously, we got along great with those guys. Most people, and Darren McBee is one of my best friends in the world to this day, so I had to say that. John knows that, obviously.
And he's a great guy.
Darren McBee was the.
He had an interview on this channel too.
Yeah, he does. He has an interview, but I also want to say he's a great guy. And until I met Rick, I didn't know much about him, but he has a great acting resume as well as the American Gladiators. Not to digress too much, but
and he was the lead. He was the lead guy of the Power Team, also. Not my Power Team, but the religious one that the question came in on. No, that we actually heard from them when we put the name out. They then understood what it was we were doing, and they let it go. Power Team USA was originally called Team America, and that turned out to be a trademark that was owned by the U.S. Olympic Committee, and I actually got a cease and desist from them. So we did. Wow. Thankfully, when we traded or changed from Team America to Power Team, we did not. The original Warrior died of kidney failure in '91. Nope. Not true. Sorry.
You're going to address that. Everyone believed that when he came back in a singlet, that it was a different Ultimate Warrior at one point because he cut his hair.
Yeah. No. Jim Hellwig, we all know how he died. It was right after Hall of Fame not long ago, and that is the original Warrior. But and I think whoever asked that question or said that, I think Hannibal and Paz will both tell you that if I'm not sure about something, I'll tell you I might be wrong or I'm not sure. Whoever the listener was, I can tell you that the original Warrior did not die in '91. He died after he was inducted into the Hall of Fame a few years ago. That was Jim Hellwig. No heat with Power Team. They were great guys. Darren McBee, who was center there, is one of the greatest people I know. And thanks for the question.
Now, as far as kind of getting Sting and Hellwig and all these guys on board, how do you turn them into, I know they're molded clay, how do you get them to be like pro wrestlers? Who you bring in to train them? Is it Bill Anderson? Like what's the next step of becoming big time pro wrestlers?
Well, it was funny. And you guys tell me if I'm going too long with my answers, tell me, but I really want to give the in-depth background and all this, but feel free to cut me off and redirect if you need to. Initially, as I mentioned, John, I grew up in Southern California, and I was a fan of the wrestlers that worked for LaBelle. And I came across a phone number for Earl Maynard. Do you remember Earl Maynard?
Sounds very familiar.
Man, John Paz, I thought knew every name in the history of this industry. And this will actually help to I did not go to Warrior's funeral, no, because we were not associated. So that's a no. We had a falling out a long time ago, which I'm sure we will talk about later. No, I have not met Warrior's brother ever. I knew his ex-wife, Sherry. We were friends. That was the only person I knew from his private life ever. Do not know Dana Warrior either, or the kids. And yeah, Sting is an awesome character and great human being, both. So John, I'm like, who can I, now that I've found these four guys, now that I have the money together for it, who can we get to train them?
We're losing you for a second there, Rick.
So I came across a phone number of Earl Maynard. Earl was a Mr. Universe bodybuilder and a gymnast, and he was oftentimes he was one of those like ungodly. Are we okay?
Losing you for a second there.
JP, are
Starting
we
to come
on?
back. Yep, still on.
Oh, okay. Are we okay now?
You're good now. You're good to go.
Okay. So anyway, the one number I found for a pro wrestler was Earl Maynard. And I learned years later that Earl is a horrible worker, but I didn't know the difference back then. So I tried to hire him. Am I on okay, John?
Yep.
No? Okay. I tried to hire Earl as our trainer. That didn't work, but he gave me Red Bastien's phone number. So I reached out to Red and we made a deal. And then Red became the official head trainer. And as Red told it years later, he himself was pretty beat up physically at that point. And we had this class of my 4 guys and 2 other monsters, Dave Sheldon, who became Angel of Death, the old UWF, and Steve Desalvo, another monster. And Red's looking at these 6 guys going, these guys are going to freaking kill me. So he hired Billy Anderson to be like the in-ring guy to do all the heavy lifting. So it was Red Bastien running the program and then Billy Anderson assisting Red. We're the trainers of the group in a racquetball court on Reseda Boulevard in Northridge, California.
How honest is Red and Bill with you as far as like, okay, these guys are greener than goose shit? Like how is that progressing? And is he very honest with you about those guys?
They kayfabed the fuck out of me, man. Oh my God. And I became friends with both years later. Tell you, I like to jump around, as you know. One of the biggest kicks I ever had in my time in the business is when I had my school up and running, Ultimate University. At this point, is considered legitimately the #1 pro wrestling school in the world. And we would have amazing guests, like The Rock came by once to be a guest. I mean, we had everybody. I had Red Bastien in as a guest one night to talk to the crew, which was, 20 years later. And or whatever, 17. He looks at me, he goes, oh man, he goes, I never thought you would do anything in this business. And he goes, and look at you now. And I said, obviously you didn't by the way you treated me back then, which is fine, because in the mid 80s, you didn't let people into the business. It's how it was. It was very, very kayfabe. And I actually had to fight after paying them a lot of money and paying all the expenses. They did not smarten me up to anything, to be honest.
Here we got a question from Zan Arroyo. Were you upset Warrior held up Vince for money in 91? SummerSlam 91.
Dude, I didn't know about it then. I know the story now, like everybody else, and I just kind of shake my head and said, it figures. It just figures. That's all. Warrior is not a good.
We're losing you for a second, Rick. You may have to repeat that answer. You may have to repeat that answer, Rick. We lost you for a second there.
He looks frozen right now. He was definitely saying that he did not like Warrior's attitude then.
Pretty blanket statement, and we could get into that's how he did things, man.
We lost your answer there, Rick. You froze.
A bit of a swerve guy. Am I upset about?
I don't even know what's going on.
No. Let me try
live. Sorry, Rick, we lost your whole answer there. I don't know what's happening, but it's
about Warrior.
I'm so sorry. No, I wasn't upset that Warrior held Vince up. I wasn't in business with either one of those guys at that time. Looking back on it, though, I can say I'm not surprised. Warrior is a bit of a swerve guy. But you know what? Upset? No. Vince is a big boy. He can take care of business.
Well, as soon as he got backstage, he got fired. So he definitely took care of business that night as far as the Warrior and him. Yep. Arroyo has another question. Did you talk to Sting during the Monday Night Wars?
I lost touch with Sting for many, many years. We got back in touch after I started UPW. So it was during the Monday Night Wars. So yes, We actually met, Sting and I met at a Jerry's Deli on Ventura Boulevard in Studio City. And this is our first time we spoke face to face, and ever since he became Sting. So it'd been a long, long time. And when I started Power Team USA, I mentioned I had an investor that matched my money. The investor's name was Richard Nomer. Richard was a merchandiser at that time for Madonna, for the Jacksons. So very successful guy. And he saw the merchandisability of Power Team, which is why he got on board. So Richard and I'll never forget this number. And there's a reason why I remember this number. It was $25,600. That was a sum total of mine and Richard's investment in Power Team USA. So we each put in $12,800. And we had the four guys, the four members of Power Team, including Warrior and Sting, all sign agreements that they would pay us back if we split up and they became successful. And they were signed what's called jointly and severally, meaning that if all four are successful, then they owe it, 1/4 each. If it's two guys, they owe a half each. If it's one guy, they owe the whole thing. So many, many years later, Sting and I met at Jerry's Deli on Ventura Boulevard, and he handed me a check for $12,800, which was my portion of the investment in Power Team. That's when we started talking again, became friends again, and he actually came out and did an appearance at a UPW show at the height of his fame as Sting. He didn't do an appearance on the show, but in our merchandise area, I had Sting, who was WCW champion at the time, RVD, who was ECW champion, and Ivory, who was a WWF women's champion, had all three of them lined up side by side signing autographs, which is pretty cool. That was a neat hat trick to be able to pull off at that time.
Shows you the kind of guy Sting is, too, that he remembers that amount of money. He's going to give you the check, like he said. A man of his word, honor, integrity. Pretty cool of the Stinger to do that.
He's a very, very solid human being. And I'm not saying that just because he paid me back. I know him well now. We talk often, and he's just a very, very stand-up guy for sure. Really good dude.
And if people go to your channel, Rick, to give your channel a quick plug, there is an interview that John did with Sting on there on your behalf. And by the way, thank you, fans. During the last stream, Rick asked people to help him get to 1,000 subscribers. And not only did he get to 1,000, he got to 1,030. So thanks to all the fans that went over to Rick Bassman's channel and helped him out because he's trying to grow it.
Yes, I really do appreciate that. So if you remember Devin or Hannibal, the way I said it was this. I go, so Hannibal's got over 200,000 followers on YouTube. I'm like, that's a lot of power and a lot of influence. So I'm like, Hannibal, I want to put you on the spot right now and see if we can get your listeners and followers out there, 100 of them, to go subscribe to my YouTube. So I'm thinking, JP, I should issue the same challenge again right now. So the power of Hannibal. Can we mobilize you guys, please, to youtube.com/Rick Bassman and see if we can get up to 1,100 tonight? That would be amazing.
Yep, there you go. Right on the bottom of the screen there. YouTube.com, Rick Bassman videos. Yeah, just type in Rick Bassman and give him a subscribe for sure. Now, someone had asked, and I just lost the name there, but it was, did Sting change at all after he found religion?
I'm not sure of the timing of Steve, finding Christ and letting Christ into his life. I'm not sure of that. So I can't necessarily tie that together with the change. But I can say this. In my opinion, people at their core are who they are. You can definitely change, no doubt about it. But he was always a good human. You could see that. Now, he was into his shit, and I'm not saying anything that he himself hasn't talked about in interviews. I would never do that. His behavior definitely changed after he got religion. At the core, though, he was always an honorable guy. I don't think we were in touch during the period when he first got into religion. He will tell you that it changed him. I just know, again, at the core, he was always a decent guy. And these days, I consider him a really, really fine human being, for sure. Religion or not, whatever, I'm not sure what part it played.
Gordo Scarface, great name. Warrior was high on cocaine and fucked up on Arsenio Hall's couch, a la Rick James. Have you seen this? Have you heard about this? Are you
I
believing
don't
this?
know. I don't know anything about that, but I can tell you this: it's got nothing to do with anything. But I walked into Sushi on Sunset one night, back when I really thought I was rolling, with the Benz and the watches and the money and all that. And I sit down at the sushi bar. I was doing that and drinking sake. And I sit down at the sushi bar. Then a guy sits down next to me, and it's Rick James. And Rick James and I ended up drinking sake all night and going in the bathroom and doing lines. So I don't know. There you are. That's Melvin. That's sake, to answer your question. No more
Let me
cocaine
ask you
these
a question about someone mentioned the Warrior doing coke. I always heard from numerous credible sources that he was really into speed, like he popped speed before his matches and his workouts. That's the rumor that I've heard from behind the scenes.
I can tell you this. I can't comment on that one way or the other. I was very not in tune in those days to what speed was. I don't even know if I had heard of it at that point in time. But I can tell you, we lived in the same house together. Me, Warrior, Mark Miller, and Garland Donahoe. Sting lived close by, so he did not move in with us. But coolest 5'4". That's awesome. Don't tell
history
that
of the world.
to Jake. Don't tell that to Jason Hervey, though. You'll make him cry because he thinks he's the coolest 5'4". Although he won't tell you he's 5'4", he'll tell you he's 5'7", which is a lie. He's 5'4", but he'd probably be upset by that. But thank you. We live in the same house, and Warrior could go from 0 to 100 at the drop of a freaking pin. I mean, turn bright red, start sweating, go into, back then, before, the Ultimate Warrior character had ever been an idea in anybody's mind, that's who he was. He was fucking nuts. I always thought it was anabolic steroids, but maybe, if you look back now and go, maybe he was on speed, I wouldn't say, oh, no, he was.
Because if anyone that knows about speed, it does cause a lot of sweating and it does cause heart issues, obviously. But so do steroids as well. But that's just a rumor I've heard, and I'm not saying it's accurate. But a lot of wrestlers, even Ricky Steamboat, has said on the record he popped it before matches here and there. It wasn't that uncommon to pop it back in the 80s.
That's when they're called poppers, I think, right? That's why you're saying pop. Yeah, that's one thing I always luckily managed to avoid. I don't have much any personal experience with it, but certainly not heard good things. If we came to learn factually Warrior was doing that, I wouldn't be surprised in the least. I just can't sit here and say that I know that he did.
Bond Lewis says, any rumor that Sting and Luger's kids are trying to break into the wrestling business?
I don't. This is funny, John. Can you believe I have never even met Lex Luger? And I thought I knew everybody in the business. So I don't know anything about Lex and his family. I would think I would know if Sting's son was trying to get in the business, but I don't. I haven't. I would think I would know, but I don't know one way or the other. I'm not saying it's not true. I've just not heard it.
Boris says, what kind of gear did everyone use back then, Rick?
Well, we had a thing. Gear back then was mainly, it was testosterone and Deca, and Anabar was just coming onto the scene in those days. That was your pretty common cocktail then. We had a thing that we, like never do coke, do speed. It's much better for you. I don't know about. I've heard speed is way worse. I used to do a lot of coke. It's been probably 15, 20 years. I'm glad it's in the past. I know none of them are any good for old guys like us or young people for that matter. But we had a thing, John, that we would like half jokingly refer to as the pro wrestling diet. And here's how we would describe it to people outside of the business. It's like, and you talk about painkillers and how that becomes part of it, so many people's lives. And it makes sense when you figure, you're on the road back in those days, 5, 6, 7 nights a week. A lot of guys are working 2 shows a day. This sounds impossible in this day and age, but that's how it was. You're inevitably bumping on hard rings, even if you're not. The ring is not a trampoline, no matter what anybody says or thinks. And night after night after night, you get hurt. You're hurt. And the way Kurt Angle tells his story, and I'm gonna get back to the pro wrestling diet. Kurt will tell you that when he first started at WWF, as it was called back then, that Steve Austin walked to him backstage and said, "Kurt Angle, huh? All-American hero." And Kurt's like, yes, sir," kind of intimidated. He's like, "Son, do you drink?" And Kurt's like, "No, sir." And Austin pats him on the shoulder and says, "Don't worry, you will." And he walks away. And, you think about what that meant. And it's this: you're on the road every night, you get hurt. Now you're back at the hotel or motel with the same guys. "Oh my God, ow, hey, try one of these. It's a pain. This will help." "Oh, no, I don't touch stuff like that." "Well, at least have a beer. It'll take the edge off." "Oh, I don't drink." "Oh, maybe one beer will be okay." Boom, it's on, right? Then the next night or 2 weeks later, you're on 3 beers, You've drank 3 beers. Then the pill's out again. Your senses aren't as sharp as normal because you're under the influence. You pop a pill. "Oh, keep the party going. Do a line," right? Back in those days, especially WCW, WWF, your body had to look a certain way. You had to look like Rick Rude or the Warlord or Hercules to have a chance. So we used to call the pro wrestling diet cocaine, anabolic steroids, alcohol, and what did I miss? Cocaine, steroids, alcohol. That was, and painkillers. That's a pro wrestler diet, but you eat really, really clean. So that's where you keep your health. Anyway, that's how it was for many years. The drug of choice back then for getting your body, as to go back to the question, was testosterone followed by DECA and Anavar.
Cryptocracy said that the anxiety in the world today will make cocaine not a popular choice anymore. They're going to be choosing some other stuff to get through their days.
Yeah, I'm really not up on drug culture these days. I can tell you that in Hawaii, where I live, there is a drug that people call ice, and it's a big, big problem here. And my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is that ice is like the Hawaiian version of meth, which I also believe is the same as speed. So it sounds like it's still pretty pervasive, but you're right. For anxiety, that would definitely not be a good thing to be doing. But if we can get off the drug stuff and onto something else.
Here's something about Warrior that came up in your Herb Abrams podcast that we talked about a couple weeks ago that people can look up on Rick's channel. You mentioned in that during your talk about your altercation with Paul Orndorff that everyone was talking about. It got like 5,000 hits on my channel. That you also got into an altercation with Warrior, and in some of the comments, people were saying, "Could you please elaborate on this Warrior confrontation that you had?"
Yeah, I'm glad to. It's funny, and I write about this in my book as well. I've had 5 near fights with famous pro wrestlers, and in every single case, the wrestler backed down. And I have to think it's this. I don't think it's because they're afraid of me by any means. I think it's because they must have had a moment of clarity and I'm like, wow, this guy is 5'4" and 135 pounds, and he's older than me. So there's no upside in kicking his ass. I can only look like a fucking heel if I do. But God help me if he actually kicks my ass. It might end my career, because back then wrestlers were supposed to be tough. So they all backed down, Warrior being one of them. And what happened is, years after he became famous as the old Sting, and I stayed in touch a little bit here and there, but really got back in touch. Warrior and I never spoke from the time we split up. I think it was 85, 86, whatever it was. And Warrior was very much the cause of Power Team breaking up. He instigated the whole thing. Sting went along with it. He didn't do it through bad intent. Warrior, in my mind, he was looking out for himself, and people do look out for themselves first. I understand that. But he absolutely screwed me in the process. There's no doubt about it. So now it's all these years later, and I'm at Gold's Gym in Venice, and I see Warrior. And he's, mega famous as a pro wrestler at this point in time. But I'm like, in my mind, and this is pretty evolved if I say so myself for so long ago. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go say hi. There's nothing that can be fixed at this point. Let me be the bigger man here, metaphorically, of course, and, try to, patch things up if they need to be patched up. I don't know. I don't know what he thinks. I mean, maybe he thinks, hey, this guy started me and I made it big on his dime, so I'm going to be nice to him. I don't know what he thought of me. So I walk up to him. He's doing very heavy barbell curls. And I'm like, hey, Jim. And he looks at me, and it was like the Ultimate Warrior inhabited Jim Hellwig's body. Just before the nut job legally changed his name to Warrior. We used to joke about this, but it was true. We laugh about it, not joke about it. He would like get emotional and go from like flesh colored to yellow to red to purple right in front of your eyes. I mean, it was pretty funny. And you start to sweat profusely. And he became the Ultimate Warrior holding that barbell. And he's like, Rick Bassman, you have the police chasing me. You have the FBI following me. And I'm standing there going, what? I didn't say anything. I mean, it was crazy. It was like the ravings of a lunatic. He goes, I should take this barbell and jam it right up your ass. So this is almost word for word what he said. And I remember I had pretty good presence of mind, and I never reacted much to getting in a fight or nearly getting in a fight. So I remember this could be a pretty funny thing to say to him. And here's what I said. I took about one step back and I looked up at him and I said, Jim, I go, dude, you're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't care. The FBI, the police. Let's move on to the barbell thing. I go, now we've all heard little rumors about you and putting things up guys' asses. I go, so if that's what you're thinking, I go, that's not going to happen either. That's on your own time. I go, but if you want, why don't you put that down so I can beat the fuck out of you right here at Gold's Gym Venice? And he started shaking. He slammed the barbell down on the ground, turned around. If you know Gold's Gym at all in Venice, there's a big main room, and then there's a couple other rooms behind it. They get smaller. He walked all the way through the gym and then just smashed open the back door in the small room, and he was gone. And that's it.
What do you think happened there? He just didn't want to fight, or he didn't want to lose, or what was the thought process?
I don't know. I think it's the same thing that all the guys thought, which is, on the off chance in their mind that I beat them, that they would be hugely embarrassed and look terrible. And because, again, my height, my size, my age, all that. But on the other side, they beat me. How's that going to make them look? It was an absolute no-win situation for them, put it that way. And I think he's not a dumb guy. As I mentioned, he's a very, very intelligent guy, emotional for sure. But I guess he had the presence of mind to think that there really wasn't an upside in it. And Warrior, to me, even though he was a million times stronger than I ever had any fantasy of being when it comes to pushing weights and that sort of thing, the guy had two left feet for sure. I of all the guys I almost got in fights with, he's one of the two I would have liked my chances against best for sure.
Who's the other one?
Brian Knobs.
Oh, wow. Knobs, he's known as a big, tough guy for sure. Knobsy boy.
Big anyways.
Big, yes. Boris said Warrior would leave his syringes from gear and HGH in his hotel rooms for the maids to find. I don't know about that, but maybe.
I don't know why he would do it intentionally. Maybe he did leave syringes. I can tell you, I don't think HGH was even a thing back then when we were all in the same house. I never saw a syringe. So that much I can say. I'm not saying he didn't do it. I just never saw it. That's all. He had to be doing a ton of anabolics, obviously.
Michael Rubin said that Warrior was nuts. Rick, you're the man. And Cryptocracy says, I don't think Warrior was a fighter, just a lot of anger. Nash challenged him to a fight and he balked. Still thought Ultimate Warrior was very entertaining.
Well, let's break that down. As much as I don't love him, he was incredibly entertaining. One of the greatest, in my opinion at least, one of the greatest pro wrestling characters of all time. How can you not be, as a fan, how can you not be in love with that pro wrestling character? Amazing. But I agree. I don't think he was a fighter. I really don't. We have no evidence of that one way or the other than the famous Rick Rude locker room story. But I still think, like,
Let's hear that. I've got Smash's version on this channel, but I haven't heard another version. Could we hear your version of that?
I don't have any inside knowledge on that, man. My version is the same as most people have heard, and I'm glad to repeat it, which is they were working a program, Warrior and Rude. Warrior is very full of himself, as people know, and that he was stiff and rude night after night. And Rude told him to take it easy prior to a match. And the Warrior, fuck you, I'm the Warrior, I can do what I want, or the Ultimate Warrior at that time. And they got in the dressing room, and Rude said, okay, now it's receipt time, and handed him his ass. That's all I've ever heard. But I've heard that from plenty of people, enough people that truly should have had firsthand experience, like Jake, for instance, that I believe it's true.
This came up yesterday. I don't mean to get off the Warrior subject, but you might know this because you're very well connected in wrestling. Ken Patera said in an interview that I guess, and many people have said it, Jake Duggan, Honky Tonk Man, that I guess Rick Rude had tried to, according to the rumor, inject some of that substance that porn stars use into his dick, and something went wrong. And there was going to be some medical issue, so he ended up overdosing. Did you ever hear anything like that related to his death?
This is the first time I ever heard that, man. I wish I could add to the info or the tale, but I sadly have nothing to contribute.
I've heard that too, but I've also heard from a lot of wrestlers that he was very experimental with everything. Like if there was a new steroid or a new whatever coming out, he was the first one on it, first one to do it. So if you're going to do a concoction and put all these different kind of shit in your body, can't be good for your heart. Obviously, the dick stuff too is probably going to end up fucking up your heart too. But he seemed like he was the experimental guy, the guinea pig, the guy that would kind of say, "All right, Decade, this is good. You know, look what it's doing for me." That in the long run cannot be good if you're doing all those different kinds of stuff.
And this is Rick Rude you're talking about, correct?
Yes, Rude.
Okay.
Rude. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when you said the word concoction, was that intentional?
No, but now that you say it, yes.
Anyway, you know, I only met Rude once, and a bunch of us ended out and about together one night, and I thought he was great. We talked for probably an hour, and I thought he was a really cool guy. I did think at that point in time, I thought he had the single best physique in all of pro wrestling. He wasn't the biggest guy, but in terms of symmetry and just how he put it all together, he was definitely doing, I mean, genetics plays a part, of course, but he obviously was at the top of his game when it came to experimentation or doctoring or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I would say Rude and Luger probably, and you could throw a Warrior in too, but Rude and Luger probably had the two best ones. PWC 247. What about the Jimmy Hart story where Warrior saved Jimmy from a guy trying to rob him because he was on the run from the cops?
Before you get into that, Harry Smith, who of course the British Bulldog knew the Ultimate Warrior, Harry told me that according to what he knew from his dad, the Warrior liked to take double of anything. Not just steroids like cough medicine or if someone prescribed him pills. According to what Harry told me, that was his mentality, double it up. So a lot of wrestlers take more than they're prescribed.
Yeah,
but
that's what I was going to say. Yeah, right. I mean, wrestlers are a pretty extreme lot, man. You know, for those who are just getting in the business now, you know, it changed drastically. And that's a good thing. It's a much healthier profession these days. You know, back in those days, I mean, 90% plus of the guys were just running it until the wheels fell off. Very, very extreme lifestyle and extreme cast of characters, no doubt about it.
So, did you ever hear anything about this Jimmy Hart story or no?
No, you know, I would challenge that on a lot of levels. I'm not saying it's not true. Maybe it's the truest story we've talked about tonight. Think about Jimmy Hart. Do you know Jimmy?
A little bit. He's a little bit of an eccentric kind of guy. Sure.
Very eccentric, but truly one of the nicest people you'll ever meet on this planet. And the thing that trips me out about Jimmy is I know him pretty well. In a business where people are always talking shit about others, just like we're doing here, Jimmy Hart will not say a negative word about anybody. I don't know if you know that about him or not. But it's pretty amazing. I mean, it's really amazing. And he actually goes the other direction. If someone's being buried, Jimmy will come up with something positive to say about the guy. So the reason I'm challenging that story is, Warrior behind the scenes is one of the most buried people in the history of this industry, one of the most unpopular guys, behind the curtain. So I could see Jimmy Hart, and this is not a slight to Jimmy at all, because I love Jimmy, but I could see Jimmy making something up to make the Warrior sound good. Who knows?
Did Warrior or Sting invite you to their Hall of Fames? I know Warrior for a fact did not. Did Sting invite you to his WWE Hall of Fame?
I was not invited, no. And I wasn't mentioned by him during his speech either, which bothered me at the time. In many, many interviews, and you'll hear him say that if it weren't for me, and I'd never talk about myself in the third person. I think it's obnoxious. So I'm really just quoting him. He says, if it weren't for Rick Bassman, there'd be no Sting. So I would have thought, he said it many, many times. It's been recorded all over the place. Keep Michael's comment in mind for a moment, because I want to address that about being a nice guy at times. I wasn't mentioned, and it bothered me. And I was told later on the best authority that you possibly could have that he was instructed specifically not to mention me during his speech. That's Sting.
Oh. Wow. Weird. Very weird. Okay. So Warrior from Michael Rubin said could be a nice guy at times.
Okay. So here's what I would say. Look, Hannibal and Paz, we're the three of us are in a business where we know a lot of celebrities. We've met many, we know a lot of them well, and it's just this. You meet people that will meet a celebrity, and it could be a celebrity that 99% of the population says that's the nicest person I've ever met. And then this one person goes, oh, I met him and he was a dick. And then you'll hear the reverse. You'll hear something about a person over and over and over and over again about what a horrible person that person is. Then somebody else will say, oh, I met him and he was really nice. So, I mean, it's a long examination of that comment, but it's this. Can you name one person in your life, celebrity or otherwise, and this question's for everybody, that is not nice at sometimes and then not a dick at sometimes? Everybody. So I'm just saying Warrior had his nice moments. Like I said, when we first talked on the phone, I was like absolutely charmed by this guy. He's intelligent, he's articulate, he's funny. Anybody can act for a minute.
What did Warrior do? You were kind of mentioning it before, to break up Power Team. You said he was a bit selfish about it and he was kind of doing it for himself. What did he do, and how did he kind of recruit the other guys to kind of break up the team?
Well, it was very specifically what happened was I went like the distance to put together like amazing promotional materials on these guys. I've got their costuming and their gimmicks together, the best photographers, the best studio, the best graphics to make it look amazing, put these great promotional folders together, and then mailed them out. Again, no internet back then. So mailed them to every territory in the industry to create awareness about them. What happened was Warrior got it into his mind. And I want to back up for a second. I mentioned a while ago that the entire concept was ill-conceived. That's my blame. I take the discredit for that. I just, again, didn't know you couldn't take 4 green guys and get them all over at the same time. It just wouldn't work that way now, let alone then. You just couldn't do it. So Warrior got it into his mind that he and Sting had the best chances of getting to go somewhere. So he went to Red, unbeknownst to me, and said, Red, I know all the promoters know who we are now because, that Rick sent packages out. Sting and I are ready to bail. Do you think you can call some of them and see if they'll just take the 2 of us? And that's what happened. Red made calls, which he apologized to me for many years later. He said, man, Rick, I was just looking out for the boys. I'm like, yeah, I get it. And then they got a call to head on out. And then there you go.
TAP. Rick Bassman found Sting in the Ultimate Warrior. Sting came after Flair, and Warrior came after Hogan. His find has a direct role in major wrestling history, which is true. He definitely had a lot of direct roles with finding these guys. Yeah, obviously Hogan and Warrior, big stars. Flair and Sting. You found Sting and Warrior out of that group, so pretty amazing.
Yeah, one thing I remember from back then, even though the group disbanded, and I lost my money and I lost the opportunity and all that. I remember 2 out of 4 getting over isn't bad.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Hey,
It's funny. Our team had literally about 18 or 19 guys in it over all the different versions, but there's 4 that are known because of that one picture that's always printed, of course. I remember, John, you see, back in those days, people that are, new fans or haven't studied history may not remember back in the mid 80s, man. It's like, I don't even know who the champions are right now. You probably know because you're way more up on it. But the point being is it changes a lot these days. And as we all know, as Meltzer writes about ad nauseum, the championships for many, many years now just haven't had any real meaning. Back in those days, man, you knew who the champion was. You knew Vern Gagne at AWA and Dory Funk Jr. at NWA and Bruno Sammartino at WWF. You knew who the champs were. Even all the way into the mid 80s, dude, you knew it was Hogan at WWF and you knew it was Flair at WCW. And I remember, because, changing the belts back then was a big, big thing. And the changes happened. You probably know the time frame better than I would, but I would say within a month or two of each other, you've got Sting over Flair and you've got Warrior over Hogan. And Pro Wrestling Illustrated put magazine covers out on both. Warrior with the belt, which is an action photo because they didn't allow the photographers in. And then Sting, which is a photo Apter took, Sting with the belt. And I remember, I don't know if it's because I was proud, because I was trying not to harbor a grudge, because I was still a mark. I don't know what it was, but I bought both magazines and I framed them both together in this whole power team collage. So that was pretty significant for the time that those became the 2 guys. No doubt about it.
Yeah, Warrior, 1990 of March, WrestleMania 6 beats Hogan for the title, and Sting, July, Great American Bash, 1990 beats Flair. But Sting was injured. He was actually supposed to win it earlier than that. He got injured. They had to waste a few months, and kind of Flair had to hold the belt for longer. So Sting initially should have won it first, and then Warrior, but it flip-flopped. But basically, they were the champ at the same time in 1990. They ruled the wrestling world and beat the 2 top dogs. So it was pretty significant.
JP, are you looking all this shit up, or you just know it off the top of your head?
No, I remember it. Just right off the top of the head. Yep.
Wow, that's impressive.
Hey,
wow.
Sting
I
and Warrior.
remember what happened yesterday. I don't know how you do that. That's crazy.
Sting and the Warrior, 2 of the top dogs, especially growing up. Those were the guy. I mean, obviously Hogan and Flair, but these are the up and coming guys when I was growing up. It's man, these guys are going to be something. And I always thought, and it's funny because people always say, "Oh, Warrior wasn't that good." And I always say he was one of the better big match wrestlers. If there was a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam, he usually had one of the better matches on the card. I don't know what it is. It's something with pressure. He likes pressure. He likes the bigger crowds.
Dude, he was born to it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's funny. It's people always say what a horrible worker the Ultimate Warrior was, right? And it's well, but by what measure? By Chris Benoit's measure or by Bret Hart's? I mean, it's it's apples and oranges. It really is. For Warrior, for what he was and what he had to work with, was as good as it gets. I'm not saying he could chain wrestle. I'm not saying he could work on that regard, but he knew what to do when he was out there. He did a pretty damn good job of it, obviously.
And wrestling is about entertaining anyways. Chris Benoit is not a fighter. Technical wrestling doesn't mean you can even do good in a fight. It's just other fake ways of putting on a show and being entertaining. You can either be entertaining as a character or be a technician. Me personally, I'd rather watch an Ultimate Warrior match than a Dean Malenko match, or a Goldberg match than a Dean Malenko. That's just my taste, but everyone's description of a good worker is different. Hulk Hogan will tell you the best worker is the guy that makes the most money, which I agree with.
Yeah, because Hogan was so limited in what he did, but why would he have to do any more than that? I mean, the guy was a freaking gold mine. He knew what he had to work with, and he did the best anybody in the history of the business ever did with what he was given.
Yeah, and it's just funny if you just look at Warrior, WrestleMania 6 against Hogan, WrestleMania 7 against Savage, easily two of the greatest matches in WrestleMania history, and obviously the two best matches in a row, 2 years in a row, Warrior, and in the biggest
Yeah.
stage. So he's pretty good for what they say. Oh, he couldn't work. He definitely could work. It's just your definition of work in wrestling.
Exactly that. Yeah, I'll never take anything away from him on that. Same with Cena. Limited in what he could do. As you know, I'm also not a fan of his. Just I'm not a fan of Warriors as a human being. But
Right.
he had gifts, John Cena, and he knew what to do with them. There's no doubt about it. You can never ever take that away from those guys.
You'll probably have to do a John Cena podcast one day because I don't even know the story on that. But someone asked earlier, I've lost the question about what your thoughts are on Warrior University as a fellow pro wrestling school operator.
When I first heard there was a Warrior University, like my reaction, like most people's, was to laugh. And the reason I did that is I heard, and I think I was misinformed, that Warrior was going to be the head instructor, and that's why I laughed, because we're talking about what a great performer he was, and he was the best. He was not a guy that could teach somebody how to be a pro wrestler. I still don't really know what happened with Warrior University, Hannibal, and I don't really know what they did there. All I would say is this: if he had a real setup and legit instructors that could bring people along, then why not use his name to draw students in? Makes sense to me.
Absolutely. It's just interesting that, him of all people would be doing wrestling training. And just in your head doesn't go hand in hand, just thinking of it.
No, but again, he was a marketer, clearly. So to me it was a marketing, I don't want to say angle because that makes it sound cheap. To me it was a business decision that makes sense on a business level.
Somebody
Why
there was
not?
saying you're engaging and entertaining. I missed the name on there, but they're loving your conversation here. Here we go. Guardian of Chaos. Cool name. Rick, you're an engaging conversationalist. Great listen. There you go.
Oh man, thank you. That's really nice. I appreciate that. And John, I always I do appreciate that. You know how I am about that sort of thing. So thank you, Guardian of Chaos. I saw I got a $5 tip earlier. If someone could tip me like $7,000, then I could get fillers and get all these wrinkles taken care of, and then it would actually look okay also, in addition to being a decent conversationalist.
You actually don't look your age. Not that you're that up there, but you've actually aged fairly well considering everything you've done, as you've discussed in
Well,
many of
I figured, Devin, after like 30 years of alcohol and cocaine and heroin for a short period of time, and not to mention my 15-year pain pill addiction, when you combine all that with 3 years of stage 4 lung cancer and a heart attack and 2 strokes and being shot and being stabbed and all that, and the homelessness that came with all the stupidity, that's been the recipe for my good looks now. It makes sense.
Nice. Now, as far as Arroyo's got another question. How are the other two guys in the photo? I believe Mark, I believe, is dead, and obviously Garland Donahoe is still alive and kicking and doing well, right? He's with his daughter, I think, right? Lives with his daughter.
Yeah, and grandchildren as well. Yeah, Garland Donahoe is living in North Carolina. Garland was the oldest member of Power Team, so I think he is 62 or 63 now. And he's just a good, solid dude, man. He really is. And I still wouldn't want to mess with Garland. Garland, in my mind, was always the toughest guy legit in the group, no doubt about it. Mark Miller, and it kind of makes, God, I feel there's so many friends have died in this business. And Mark, I still feel more than any of them. Him and Sean O'Hara, because they were my two closest friends in this industry who have died. And they were both by suicide, sadly. Mark, I always say to Tom Howard, and Tom is absolutely my best friend in the history of this industry. I'm like, man, you remind me so much of Mark Miller. I wish you guys had met. You would have been like best friends. It would have been cool to hang out with both of you at the same time. Mark sadly took his life about 15 years ago, and I hadn't been in touch with him for a couple of years, and I felt just horrible when I heard. I'd wish not. I didn't feel guilty, but I'd wish I'd been in touch. And same with Sean. Had a chance to talk to him, see what's going on. So Mark, God rest his soul, is no longer with us. Garland Donahoe is alive and well in North Carolina, which I'm glad to report.
And Bill Anderson, who trained them, is actually fighting COVID right now. He's doing fairly well though, so I just wanted to throw that out there. How's your relationship with Bill Anderson over the years, Rick? Did you guys ever have any tension, or has everything always been pretty good?
Never. Always liked Billy. We always got along well. Always enjoyed him. He's a cool dude. He's funny. He's a great storyteller. And anybody out there, listening or watching, I don't know what your beliefs are, but please put a good thought out for Billy, man. He's a good dude.
What about Dave Sheldon, Michael Rubennext?
Okay, so quick setup for anybody not having I know we mentioned Dave earlier. Dave was one of these student basketball court with Bill Anderson and Red Bastien. 4 guys were power team. The other 2 were Steve Desalvo, who had a brief run in Calgary, I think, Hannibal. That's not wrong. You guys would know better than I would.
You're right. Steve
and Dave
Sheldon, also Montreal, and he also had some WWE matches, one of which ended up in a shoot with Outback Jack, as John's going to be interviewing him, but Outback told me Steve was, I guess, kind of an asshole, and I haven't just heard that from Outback Jack. He liked to rough people up in there.
Yeah, he was a tough mother, man, Steve DeSalvo. Yeah, I always wanted to see Steve and Garland Donahoe go. I thought that would have been interesting. But Dave Sheldon was the 6th member of that training group. Big guy for back then. I would say 6'6", 320. Just a big, giant dude. Later became the Angel of Death, right? John and UWF, I think, at Bill Watts' company. And I don't have much to say about Dave because it's been so long now, but the impression that I remember is just very quiet and very, very nice. That's what I would say about Angel of Death, Dave Sheldon.
And just to throw that out there, I believe the story goes Outback Jack knocked out Steve DeSilvo by hook or by crook. He was able to make him pass out. So, as the old story goes, you never know in a fight. You know what I mean?
You don't know. Yeah. You never.
And that happened in Montreal, in Quebec, because Steve was wrestling in Quebec there, and at that time, WWE would use some of the local stars still on their shows.
Alon asks, was the power team a success in Rick's opinion? That's a good one.
In no way, shape, or form. No. I mean, if you look at it, if you keep it in a box, just for the business model of power team, the idea was, again, put these 4 guys together, use the wrestling ring to catapult them to this major multimedia stardom. So by that measure, no, because power team never got out of the box. It never launched. The other side of things, what it did for what it's worth, it gave me a bit of a legacy when I got in the business for real years later. It did open doors, no doubt about it. And, here we are, when is 05? Wow. 35 years later, doing a whole dedicated show about it. So it has legs. Power team has legs. It opened doors. It created a start of a legacy for me. So in that regard, I guess, as a business unto itself, absolute miserable failure, which I'll take most of the credit for that. Well, me and Jim Hellwig can have part of the credit.
Sean Lane said, which of the Power Team USA was on the Secrets of Pro Wrestling back in the day, late 80s, early 90s? Was any of the guys on that? I want
to ask Sean. I want to ask Sean Lane to give us the answer. I don't know. Don't know about that.
I think he's talking about that special that was actually on around the late 90s during the Attitude Era boom, which you brought up in your Jim Cornette talk when he was accusing you of being the one of causing the whole kayfabe break in the business when that show had come out years before your UPW documentary, which was more of a documentary than a secrets revealed show, but we don't need to go there.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. No idea.
Harley Race was in that. I do know that. They blacked out
which is
face,
shocking.
but you could see the hair and that gravelly voice. So yeah, this has been good. Thanks everyone for your questions. Is there anything else, Rick, you or John would like to say about this group? Wasn't a success for you, but obviously Sting and Warrior, it was a great success for them. They're two icons, and they made it to the WWE Hall of Fame. They're still talked about all these years later. So congratulations on helping them. It's too bad you weren't financially successful out of that.
You know what? It's all right. It's fine. You know, Sting paid me back. As I said, I didn't make the millions that we initially envisioned. Very few businesses go the way you first set out. It just doesn't work that way. So it's all part of a numbers game. But, you know, I still do business with Sting to this day. We do small little deals together, and it's, you know, it's all good. It's all good. We're going to stay our managers at Gold Gym. Yes, Steve Borden was the day manager at Gold's Gym, where our racquetball court was in the Valley. That's where I found him.
This isn't related to the power team, but we may as well throw this in to get Rick's opinion since it's all over the news. What's your opinion on The Undertaker and his farewell? Do you think this is going to be his real retirement, or do you think he's going to come back again?
I think he's done. You know, look, there's two answers here. Well, there's three answers. One is I don't know. Then there's he's done or he's not done. So we have a 33 and a third % chance. I think he's done. Mark Calloway, as a human being, is a really, really good dude. He is super appreciative of, you know, the life he's lived through becoming The Undertaker. One of the greatest characters of all time, if not the greatest. That and Waylon Mercy, of course, my other favorite. I think he understands that I don't want to say there's nothing more to do with it or nowhere else to go with it. I mean, it's limited only by his creativity and Vince's creativity. They could keep going and going. But I think when I say they, I want to say Taker and Vince both. They know that it's time. So, you know, he's set for life financially, obviously. He's probably always have in his blood to want to do one more shot. But I think, as you know, he discussed in the series, in the documentaries, he doesn't feel like he can perform at the level to which the fans deserve. And I know for him, that's not lip service. He really means that. So all those things considered, I think he's done.
Very good. Well, I guess down the road, I don't know if John Cena will be the next subject like the fans want, but we'll come up with something. You fans can put it in the comments who you want to hear Rick talk about next time. And you can look up on past broadcasts. He's already done one on The Miz and Tank Abbott. He's done one on his buddy Jim Cuckold Cornette, and one on the UPW guy Herb Abrams, which was very well received. It actually surprised Rick how well received that was. So is there anything you'd like to plug, guys?
You know what might be fun to do, Devin? Although this might not be fun because people, you know, the world likes conflict. You don't go to a movie if there's going to be conflict. But in my book, I did a chapter called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of Pro Wrestling and Mixed Martial Arts. And it's as it sounds. I have a list of the good and of the bad, in my opinion at least, and, you know, talked about why each was in which column. It might be fun to talk about the good guys in one episode. I don't know. Just the guys that, in my opinion, are really stand-up, and girls that are good stand-up human beings in the pro wrestling and MMA businesses. Just a thought.
Now, there's more. In my experience, there's more in the MMA business and wrestling. But what percentage in wrestling would you say are good? Because I would say that it's lower than 50% actually. But maybe that's just.
I never thought about it in those terms before. Wow, I don't know. I don't know, Hannibal. I would say at least 50% good. Hopefully, I mean, I'd like to think more, but I'd probably have to put some more time and thought into that before I could come up with a qualified answer.
Now, John, you know all about where people can subscribe to your various podcasts. You want to let everyone know where they can look you up?
Sure, yeah. Just if you want, go to tmptempire.com. It's got all the list of all the podcasts. It's got Kevin Sullivan's Taskmaster Talks, University of Dutch with Dutch Mantel, Taking to School with Dr. Tom Pritchard, Rick Bassman's Talking Tough, Pro Wrestling 101 with Just Incredible. Got a lot of good stuff. And of course, the two-man Power Trip interview series. We're interviewing a lot of the great guys. We have interviewed Sting. He is on there. He's awesome. Had on Goldberg, Hall, Nash, DDP, RVD, HBK. Had on all of them, so check it out. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. Got a lot of good stuff coming up. Like Hannibal mentioned, got Outback Jack coming up. Very rare interview, and you could check him out on this channel as well for even more in-depth stories. But besides that, I mean, that's about it. And I think people will be shocked of a different story you will learn from Rick in probably a future episode here about John Cena.
Yeah, and I want to put on top of that, John Pause, that for people out there that are fans of pro wrestling, and I would assume that's everybody that's watching, that John is, in my opinion, and it takes a lot of people into consideration, probably the most educated guy I know that talks about the pro wrestling business. His shows are very, very in depth. They're not hype filled. They're very straight. You'll get more good, solid, and entertaining information from Two Man Power Trip than any other platform out there. So that's my endorsement of your stuff.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that. Big words. Thank you.
Of course. And Hannibal, same for Hannibal, man. Hannibal TV, 200,000 plus and going strong. Okay. I feel bad for your dog now, man. That is a horrendous sweater. That poor dog. I was about to say good things about you, Hannibal. Now I'm taking them all back.
Well, it's freezing cold here. There's snow outside. It's not like Hawaii where they can walk around naked. One last question. Yeah. This is a good one because some of his speeches are motivational. Some of them are just crazy. But have you ever watched one of the Warriors' motivational speeches on YouTube?
I've seen bits and pieces. Yeah, I have. Should I comment more than that or just say yes?
well, sure. I mean, I'll say this. The injections of inspiration that he did were good, but the ones that he did at the universities are
He's just unhinged. He's unhinged, man. Yeah.
The one at Penn State specifically, I think, is the craziest one.
Yeah, but, they're comedy at its finest. But I'll let you guys shut this down however you guys want. I'm checking out of here.
Last thing I would say was this, because I just said I've looked at his speeches as unhinged. He was a human being. He left 2 daughters behind. And I mean this sincerely. I don't know them, but I wish them all the best. And I hope that, whatever they hear from me, from you, from anybody, that they remember their father fondly and that they have, good memories and a good life for what he left for them.